All right, while others are joining, I'll go ahead and make a few announcements and just welcome everyone. My name's Catherine Crockett, and I'm the board president of the Monterey Peace and Justice Center. Thank you for joining us tonight. I want to start off by just taking a moment to acknowledge that we've lost Joyce Vanderveer. She was a founding member of the Monterey Peace and Justice Center and a board member since 2004 when the center opened. Many of us who looked up to her for leadership and strength will remember Joyce as a friend, a mentor, and a guiding light. She was a matriarch and a generous spirit. There'll be a celebration of life to be announced in the days to come. And if you get the Monterey Peace and Justice Centers or the Peace Coalition's Peace Calendar, there'll be some information there. You can find that at peacecentral.wordpress.org. So welcome, everyone. I'll go ahead and introduce Dr. Sharat Lin, who's joining us tonight. He has a PhD in medical physics. He's a research fellow at the San Jose Peace and Justice Center and its former president. He writes and lectures on global political economy, labor migration, the Middle East, public health, the environment, and the arts in social protest. He serves on the board of advisors for the Initiative for Equality, which is a global network of individual activists and partner organizations working to build a more equal and participatory societies around the world. And he does research with a human agenda. You can learn more about that organization at www.humanagenda.net. Dr. Lin travels extensively and reports firsthand on current issues. He's been on the front line of some epic moments in history, including the Cultural Revolution in China, the Palestinian uprising, and the beginning of the Arab Spring movement in Egypt. This evening, he'll present his firsthand observations and comparative analysis of elections in Mexico, El Salvador, Cuba, Venezuela, and in the US. Welcome, Dr. Lin, and thank you for being with us this evening.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine, for inviting me, and thanks to the Monterey Peace and Justice Center and the Peace Coalition of Monterey County. I always enjoy coming, whether physically or not, to speak with your groups. It's always a pleasure, and it's a deep sense of loss for me personally to have just heard about Joyce Vanderveer, and I've known her for quite a number of years, and it's really I'm so saddened by it. It's really an emptiness in my heart, and my condolences to all of you. So today I'm going to speak about elections. We just, of course, got through an unprecedented presidential election with unprecedented challenges, and it's likely that some of the fallout from this election will be continuing to deal with it here in the United States. And so it raises questions about the nature of our democracy, the nature of our elections, and the whole political process here in the United States. The United States, of course, has long championed itself as being the pioneer of democracy. I mean, after the first democracy in Greece, at least according to the accepted historical record, the United States was a pioneer in certain kinds of democratic functioning, in the establishment of a constitution that has, for better or for worse, has remained largely intact since it was first written. over 200 years ago. And the United States has long had this notion of at least this is the public posture of trying to democratize the rest of the world. And my experience in a number of Latin American countries and also countries in Asia, North Africa, is that the democratic practices, of course, vary tremendously from one country to another, but they are becoming quite widespread in one form or another. And just because some of these elections and democratic practices are relatively new in some countries, that does not mean that we should discount them. That does not mean that there has been tremendous innovation and that there's something to learn from these other countries. So specifically, I want to talk about 4 other countries that I have visited, some of them multiple times, as an official election observer, either as an international observer or as a media observer in recent years. So I've been to Mexico, to Venezuela, to Cuba, and to El Salvador, where I have observed elections in these countries, and was given access to the polling places, to the commission that actually conducts the elections in these countries. And it's actually quite different, in these countries from the United States in several major respects. So one is that in the United States, we have I don't know of any other country in the world that does this, where the election of the president of the United States is actually called by the media, by private media. Of course, it's because the results of the elections actually roll out over a period of time as the ballots are counted. But in other countries, elections are called by a commission that is a central commission. I mean, if these are nationwide elections, elections are called by a neutral commission that is tasked with running the elections, establishing the rules by which that election will take place, and making sure that they're consistent across the entire country. So in other words, the consistency across all states and all counties ensures that that every vote counts just as much as every other vote, right? Here in the United States, we have different rules and different procedures, particularly for non-standard votes, like mail-in ballots, like absentee ballots, like provisional ballots. I mean, our system is complicated. I mean, it's complicated for reasons that there are sincere attempts to promote inclusiveness, but at the same time, it makes the system hard to implement, and means that the rules by which ballots are enabled and counted in different states will vary, and it may even vary from one county to another in significant ways. So I think there's something to be learned from having a uniform system throughout the entire country. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen if I can. Let me see. Okay, so I think everyone can see what I'm sharing on my screen. So the first thing is that this is what you see in the mainstream media. First of all, most countries in the world have some kind of elections, whether they are at the national level or maybe they're only limited to the local level. But all of the countries that you see here in green conduct some kind of elections, whether those elections are truly fair or not. And the notable exceptions are the Arabian Gulf countries, as you can see, the largest of which is Saudi Arabia, the Vatican, and Brunei. The rest of the countries have some kind of elections. Now, you can debate about how democratic those are, and there are attempts by mainstream media, by mainstream think tanks to try to quantify the extent to which different countries are democratic. In other words, they have elections, but whether those elections are really give a choice, really give a choice to the voters. And they come up with this, which basically says that the dark green is the most democratic, according to the economist here. And the countries that are the least democratic are the ones in the dark red. And so there's a continuum here. And you can see that if we just focus on the Americas, we see that there are 4 countries in particular that are singled out as being less democratic. And all 4 of them are countries which have left governments in power. And that, of course, this reflects what I believe is a political bias. And I have visited 3 of these countries and observed elections in 2 of them, namely Cuba and Venezuela. And from my experience, I can attest that the elections in those countries they're different, but they are not in any fundamental way less democratic than elections in the countries that are green. Okay, so let's look at that in more detail. First of all, I want to just give you a snapshot of what we do here in California, because most of you probably have either filled out your mail-in ballot this year because of COVID, or you have gone into a polling place and your polling place, but you don't know what other polling places or other counties are doing. But anyway, this is and it's always changing. The picture is changing. The counties in California, at least, are constantly updating their processes and their technology. And the county of Santa Clara was no exception. It rolled out a new voting machine this year. And what you see here is early voting at Levi Stadium. And Santa Clara County is one of the counties that fortunately does give me some access to photograph what they do inside a polling place. And there are still enormous concerns in this country whenever photographers go about protecting privacy. So it's harder here than it is in the Latin American countries. But anyway, so this is an electronic roster. This touchpad is connected to an electronic roster that has the names of every voter in the county. And the procedure in California, and this is required by the California Secretary of State, is you have there's a concept of one ballot, one signature, one vote. Okay, so in order to enable the ballot, the voter has to sign, and the signature is not, it's not a signature check of identity. It's an oath. You take an oath and sign that you are, that under oath that you are the person who you are, and you haven't voted before, and so that's what this registration process is. Then you go to the voting machine, and again, this is a new voting machine. And for a while, we had machine voting without a paper trail, and of course that was rejected because people were concerned that if there was some glitch, some software glitch in the electronics, we needed a paper trail to be able to validate the results. So the new approach is, well, actually the approach before this was to vote a paper ballot that would immediately get fed into a ballot counting machine, and the ballot counting machine would count the votes and then store them in a memory, and so you would immediately, before the voter leaves the polling place, you immediately have two records. You have the paper ballot that's in the box, and you have this tally of the votes that were voted on that paper ballot. Now the new approach is to do it electronically, because people actually like to. Most people actually like to vote on the electronic devices, because we're getting used to digital devices now. And so in this case, the electronic vote is created first by voting on the touchpad, and then you press a button. When you're finished, press the button, and it prints a paper ballot that has all the choices that the voter has made. And then there's the option of paper ballots. So that we still have paper ballots, and this is also for mail-in. So sometimes people bring their mail-in ballots there and vote them at the voting place. And the ballot that got printed out from that polling station then just gets feeded into this ballot box, and so the paper ballot is recorded and stored for the paper trail. Now the other thing, of course, because of COVID, there have been a huge number. I mean, in some cases, more than half the ballots cast have been mail-in ballots, and this is actually in the registrar of voters in Santa Clara County, where the mail-in ballots are received. And this was, of course, as you can see, this is weeks before Election Day, and there were already hundreds of thousands of ballots, and there's this room full of people who are opening the envelopes and collating them, stacking them, and then what they're doing here is this machine that scans the envelopes to make sure that each one of the envelopes is signed. So in other words, you got the one signature, one signature, one ballot, one vote, and those correspond. And then later on, these ballots will actually go through a machine. So on Election Day, these ballots will actually get fed into a machine that will be unfolded and then fed into that machine to actually count the votes. So that's what happens in Santa Clara County. In Alameda County, it's the same equipment. So they've upgraded to exactly the same system. So this was the roster, the electronic roster. These are people just watching the polling stations, the machines, to make sure that nobody is tampering with them. And then there are these two ballot bags here for the printout. The printout goes into either the regular ballot or the provisional ballot. And these are the machines the same machines that Santa Clara County was using. So, so that's California. Now, I because we had early voting, I was able to observe the early voting in Alameda and Santa Clara counties. But I chose this year to actually spend election day in Georgia. And the reason that I went to Georgia was because if you remember the 2018 election, it was gubernatorial. Brian Kemp was running for governor, Republican, while he was still in office as Secretary of State. Okay, now that seems like a huge conflict of interest, to be the supervising the election that you're running in. And he won that election. And he won that election by all kinds of techniques for voter suppression, by removing polling places in predominantly poor and Black neighborhoods, resulting in people standing in queues for 4 hours or more. Many of those people never got to vote because a lot of them are working people. They just can't spend 4 hours waiting to vote. And then people were purged, and we know the story. I mean, that Black voters were purged from the voting rolls in Georgia and many other Republican states in numbers that ran into the tens of thousands, and in some cases, if not in the hundreds of thousands. So it was really a horrible situation. And Brian Kemp, of course, was running against Stacey Abrams, and when Stacey Abrams lost that election, she mounted a campaign for not only voter turnout, but also to clean up the system. And the new Secretary of State who replaced Brian Kemp when he became governor, then he had to appoint a new Secretary of State that was Raffensperger, and he turned out to be a committed a Republican again, but he had integrity. He had integrity, and he was in the spotlight because of Stacey Abrams' campaign, and all sorts of independent organizations, including Common Cause and the NAACP, mobilized people to change things in Georgia. And so even in the primary, the 2020 June primary in Georgia, there were some problems, but it was much better than 2018. And so I decided that I'm going to go and to Georgia and observe the election there, and also serve as an election protector. The idea of an election protector is you're just, even if it's just another pair of eyes, another physical body on the ground, keeping an eye on things, and just being prepared to assist a voter who may be turned away for no good reason. And that's what I did, and along with thousands of others, of people both from Georgia and from other states. And unfortunately, the rules in most counties in Georgia are restrictive, and you can see the sign here. This is a polling place in College Park, which is a suburb of Atlanta, and so this fellow standing in front is one of the poll workers, And so he's basically enforcing that sign that's behind him, which says that only poll workers, poll watchers who are the official poll watchers, and I'll get into that in a minute, and persons who are actively voting are permitted in this area. So so the official poll watchers that they're talking about are actually in Georgia they're termed poll monitors. So poll monitors are the people who are with one political party or another, or one stakeholder or another on the ballot. So in other words, I don't know if Georgia has propositions, but that's somebody who is for a ballot proposition is a stakeholder in California. So the poll workers are for the most part from the Democrat and Republican parties, and of course the Republicans don't care because they wanted the status quo. So all of the poll monitors in practice were Democrats, or they were poll monitors for the Democratic Party, because the risk of voter disenfranchisement is a risk to Democratic voters and voters of color in Georgia. So those are the official poll monitors. They get a badge from the registrar of voters, and they can go into the polling place. Actually, there are two kinds. There's an outside poll monitor and an inside poll monitor. So the inside poll monitor can go in. The outside poll monitor cannot. So it's very restrictive. So I actually could not get any photographs of what was actually happening in the polling place. I couldn't even go in when there were voters inside. The only time that I was allowed inside a polling place in Georgia was when there were no voters at that moment. It was empty, and I was not allowed to take any photos. So, I mean, fortunately, it was, we did not hear any bad stories from voters. And, in past elections, I think they may have been very sensitive about allowing observers, any kind of observers inside, because of all the voter disenfranchisement that was happening in previous years. But it didn't happen in the November election. It didn't happen because of people like these, because these election protectors were there, and as I said, in the thousands, at every polling place, that had a substantial Democratic turnout, and I saw them there, I met them, and they were telling me that, well, they didn't observe any problems in November, and so that was a triumph. It was a triumph not because of Brad Raffensperger particularly, but because of the grassroots pressure from below. And so this is another polling place where there had been problems. There were big problems in June, in the June primary, and so the media decided to camp out here, and we had tons of election observers. We had election monitors, and then election observers who are just independent observers, and then me. And these are some of them at the entrance to the polling place. And so most of them, once again, unless they were the inside poll monitor, and there's only one per polling place, they could not go inside. One thing that I found very, very surprising and sort of hopeful was that, and this is the first time Georgia has ever done this, is to have a mobile voting, these buses that are fully equipped, ready to go, And what happened in this polling place was that, which is the building behind, is that the power went out the day before election day. On Monday, there was no power, and so the poll workers called the registrar and said, we don't have power, so what are we going to do? And Raffensperger's office sent these two vans, and they have their generators, and they were ready to take voters. Well, they were set up that night, Monday night, and we're up and running on Tuesday morning. And this is, so all the equipment is already pre-set up inside. The other thing that was an important innovation as a result of the efforts of Stacey Abrams are these brand new absentee ballot drop boxes. Georgia didn't have absentee ballots before, and so this was and it's also it's still a point of contention, as we'll get into in a moment, that whether or not to allow absentee ballots. But the November election was exceptional, and also the runoff election for for the Senate were two exceptional elections run under the same rules, and where every Georgia voter could vote, and Georgia went Democratic. So so that's sort of the story behind that in very brief. The why it's so important is I mean, there's several reasons. One is because the political polarization is extreme in Georgia, and it is so in much of the South. But in Georgia, it's at the demographic tipping point. And what you see here is the map on the left is, now these are both of the metropolitan Atlanta area, and what the map on the left shows is where the Black population is. So the colored areas have a high Black population, and you see that really correlates with the way people vote, whether they vote Democratic and blue or red and Republican areas. And it's extreme. You can see that in the dark red areas, which are those rural counties around Atlanta, the margin of victory for Republicans is more than 45%. And similarly, in central Atlanta, the margin for Democrats is more than 45%. So it's really extreme polarization. And there's demographic change in Georgia as the new generation is more Democratic. The Atlanta is an area which is attracting a lot of immigrants from other parts of the country, and so there's a big demographic shift that's underway in Georgia. Now, the response to these two elections, the November and the January elections, is that there's going to be a new wave. There is a new wave of voter suppression bills coming to up in the Georgia legislature, which is still controlled by the Republicans. And these are just some of them. One of which, SB 69, ends automatic voter registration. SB 72 requires county registrars to automatically remove people who have died, and of course, that sometimes you've got two people with the same name, and there are questions about how these are verified. SB 71 restricts the people who can apply for an absentee ballot, and SB 67 requires a voter to actually show an ID to get an absentee ballot. Now, if you're out of town, or if you're in a hospital, how are you going to do that? So this is a real issue. And then there's also a petition to there's several petitions, and you can see them online, to recall Brad Raffensperger. This one says Raffensperger has let our state down. He and Governor Kemp, also Republican, made a deal with the devil, Stacey Abrams, and we are now paying for it. But anyway, so this is the kind of extremism that we're seeing. Now, taking a look at the broader question of how fair are elections. There are two aspects to look at when we consider the fairness of elections. One is the political process. So this is a much more subjective issue, and it's a big one. I'm not going to do justice to it yet, and this is part of this talk. Actually, is a works in progress. I'm gonna touch on it, but probably not really resolve it, other than to say that the political process is about who gets to be a candidate. Do these candidates have equal access to publicity, to the media? Do they have equal access to the resources that are needed to mount a campaign? What is the role of money in political campaigns? Are the candidates vetted in some way before they can run? And so on. And so these are elements of the political process. The electoral process is what I showed you, is about how the elections are actually run and how the ballots are actually counted. That's a lot more objective and to some extent quantifiable. But anyway, let's move forward. Now, when we look at the electoral process, these are some elements of the electoral process that I think we should look at, and it's quite possible that I have left some out. I'm sure if I think about this more, I will think of more bullet points to add here, and maybe you can suggest some as well. So one is voting eligibility. In other words, who is eligible to vote, right? I mean, is the voting eligibility as inclusive as possible? Does it leave somebody out who is a citizen and who is of age? And there's even a debate about what should the voting age be. In Cuba, the voting age is 16. And what's wrong with that? If you can drive at the age of 16, why can't you vote at the age of 16? Accessibility means that if you are a voter, you're a registered voter, do you have access to the polls? And the mail-in ballot is a big help, but not every state has mail-in ballots. Most countries do not have mail-in ballots. Are there provisions for people with access impairments? Most polling places in the countries that I've been to are at ground level. There are no significant steps to get to them, but they're not 100% accessible. And then there are some that aren't accessible, both in other countries as well as here in the U.S. And then there's the question of accessibility for the blind and for the deaf, and what provisions are provided for that. Integrity of unique voter identification. So, there are all these charges. Of course, a lot of them are bogus. They're fabricated charges of voter fraud in the November election. And a lot of these charges would not even be possible if the integrity of unique voter identification were more stringent. And it turns out, according to my analysis, that the United States is actually ranks rather low in this area compared to other countries, certainly in Latin America. Secrecy of ballots, everybody has that. And everybody has that in the countries that are that I have observed, and that I consider to be countries where there is a good semblance of democratic functioning, imperfect, but they are democratic. So it's there's not too much differentiation here. Security of the polls. All the countries that in which I've observed elections, the question of, for example, police presence or security presence varies depending upon the threat. And I have not seen personally any cases where the polls were particularly insecure, or that the security forces abuse their powers and made the polls insecure. So I think there isn't too much differentiation there. Traceability and redundancy of the voting trail. So do all these elections have a paper trail? And is there redundancy? Are there two trails? So is there an electronic trail and a paper trail? Okay, that's certainly the trend. We're not there yet. There are many places that still use entirely paper ballots, but I think it's in the future everywhere. Transparency of tabulation. So the counting of the ballots. To what extent is the actual counting of the ballots and tabulation of the votes something that can be observed and monitored by independent observers? And that's a good question. And so I'd like to return to this question. And then the institutionalization of oversight. So this means that to what extent is there a process for having independent observers? Not anybody, but you have certification of people who are, because there's limited space in a polling place, so you don't want a ton of people in there. But there should be some independent observers who are allowed in. And for the most part, the U.S. has no process for this. In California, there is no process. I mean, I've talked to registrars, and there's no provision particularly for official election observers. And it's an issue that hasn't arisen because we take it for granted that the registrars of voters and their staff have integrity in the state of California. And for the most part, I think that is true. The political process. So here are some of the things. I think I've already gone over some of them. So to what extent is there pluralism? To what extent is there a real choice between different candidates or different alternatives? To what extent is there a public debate whereby voters can become better informed about what the candidates or the issues are, or what the candidates stand for? Popular participation in the process, and freedom from, when I say money corruption, I don't just mean buying of votes and that sort of thing, but I also mean that to the extent that money through advertising sways votes, and so we know that in California that for example the propositions that are on the ballot, that the big money buys results when it comes to the propositions and also the candidates in California, and so that needs to be removed from the electoral equation. And then, of course, with the what happened with the transition from Trump to Biden, what is the institutional stabilization of a contested transition. I won't talk about that anymore today, but these are some of the issues that we would look for in terms of fairness of the political process. So taking a look at Mexico, I monitored 2 elections in Mexico, presidential election in 2012, and then again in 2018, 6 years later. So Mexico uses a paper ballot, and there are, as you can see, there are separate ballot boxes for different races. So there's a each races will have a separate ballot paper. So you made in this election, the people had 6 pieces of paper, 6 separate ballots, and each one of the ballots is color coded to go into a different box for the Senate, for local races and so forth. And after people vote, they have their thumbs inked with an indelible ink that at minimum takes a few days, if not over a week, to wear off. And what this does is it ensures that no one votes twice. And Mexico, of the countries that I observed, Mexico is the only country that does this. And then there's the transparency of the tabulation. So in each precinct, the poll workers will, after the close of the polls, they'll open the ballot box in front of observers. And these observers are both the observers from the political parties as well as independent observers like me, who watch this whole process. Each ballot is taken out, opened up, and then put into a different stack. And so it's all transparent. We can see the whole thing from start to finish. And then at the end, you've got all these stacks, and then the stacks can be counted. Now, the only major problem that I observed in Mexico, well, there were 2 problems. There's one is the political process, which is the corruption of the political process and the buying of votes. But in terms of the electoral process, the only problem is this. This is a queue. This is a queue. You see it. You see it in front here, and it winds around. Actually, you can see 2 parts of the queue here, winding around, and you can see more queuing going way back in the background at the central terminal, the transportation terminal. So there are thousands and thousands of people in this queue, and this polling place is what is called a casilla especial, a special voting center. And special voting center is a voting center which has here's another cue for another one of these, and this is a voting center which has instead of a paper roster, it has a laptop computer, and that laptop computer contains the national roster, the roster of all voters in the country. And so if you are a voter and you're not where your home is, then ordinarily, if you're at home, you go to the polling place, which is your assigned precinct, right? Just like we do here. But if you're not at home, there's no mail-in ballot, there's no absentee ballot, so you have to go to a casilla especial and cast a ballot there because your name is on the national roster. The problem is that the law calls for all polling places in Mexico to have a maximum of 750 ballots. So, sure, the first 750 people will vote, and the rest, the other thousands and thousands, will be disenfranchised in this election. And that was the major problem that I saw in Mexico. This is just the press room at the Federal Institute of Elections, and where they will also present and certify the results. In 2018, I saw basically the same process. The people come and present an ID card. That ID card is matched to not just a name, but you have a photo to match. And the person then signs it and puts a fingerprint. And this is and everybody has a voter ID card. The ballot is very simple compared to our ballots. Well, of course there are several different ballots, but this one is for the congressional deputies, and you can vote by the party symbol. So if you're illiterate, you can recognize the party symbol. If you can read, then you can actually read the names of the candidates. And then at the end, of course, the thumb is inked. But once again, 6 years later, we have the same problem with the casillas especiales. This is the laptop computer that has the national roster, and these are the people clamoring to be able to vote, and most of them will not be able to, unfortunately. In El Salvador, there's what they do is they use schools. Actually, throughout Latin America, schools are very common places for voting centers. And what they do is they put multiple precincts together in one school. What that means, of course, is that people have to travel longer distances to get to the schools, rather than, if each one of these precincts were in a neighborhood, you could walk to them. But anyway, that's what they do in El Salvador. That was the day before, so it was the setup the day before, and this is the day of, before dawn, the polls open, and the first people to vote are the police, so that they can go on duty guarding the polls. And there's a nice lookup here with your name and photo, so you can find out if this is your precinct. And so people look for their precinct. It's also on their voter ID card, sign the roster, the paper roster, and they get a paper ballot that goes into this ballot box. Election observers, you see them with the on the far left, you see this person in the red is the FMLN, a representative, and the one in the blue, white, and red is the Arena. And so the political parties have their observers at each precinct or each voting table. And this is the voter ID. And the ballot in this case was very simple. It's presidential, and there were only two candidates. This was a runoff, and so there were only two choices. And the counting of the ballots is done in the precinct, just as in Mexico, in front of the party observers and then the other election observers. You can see them here, and there's more counting of ballots. So it's transparent. Anybody can watch this process. Still, there were claims of fraud, because not because there was any evidence of it, but because the margin was very narrow in a number of precincts, and so they called for a recount. So this was in the place where all the ballots are tabulated. So the Supreme Electoral Tribunal rented space in the Crown Plaza Hotel, and so this is where the counting and the recounting was being done. So they had all these rooms where there were committees that were doing the recounts, and this is just simply the video monitoring of those recounts. And I actually went into some of these rooms, and I could observe for myself this committee with the party observers here in the blue and the red, observing the entire process. So it's very transparent, very accessible, and this is how some of the results are sent electronically to the central, and then the calling of the results by the TSE. Calling the results of the election. Now, there are issues of corruption. There have been charges, and there are adverse influences on the election. This is part of the political process, and so when we analyze this, we're going to take this into account as to when we rate the democracy, the type of democracy in El Salvador. Okay, election observers. These are international observers, of which I was one of these, and so that is El Salvador. For Cuba, I observed the referendum for the new constitution on February 24th in 2019 in Cuba. Now, I've long been wanting to go and observe an election in Cuba, because if you follow the narrative in this country, there are no elections in Cuba. Cuba is a dictatorship, and so even if there are elections in Cuba, they're fraudulent. Well, are they? So this is a ballot box. You can see that it's sealed. There's sealed tape on the bottom. There are these two kids who are guarding, and they take shifts. They're 30-minute shifts, and they take turns guarding the ballot box. And the process is very similar to what it is in every other country. There's a roster. The voter has a voter ID card, and so that ID card is matched to the roster. The voter signs the roster, which is the oath, and is given the ballot and casts their ballot. So it's fairly simple. This is the roster here. You see the signatures on those sheets, and young and old are poll workers, and the poll worker the voters go up to a polling station, look up their name. This is these are the rosters for this voting center. Look up your name to make sure that you're which table you're voting at. And at the end of the day, the ballots are counted, and outsiders can observe. So Cuba does not have an institutionalized system of election observers, like Mexico and El Salvador have, but I was invited to observe the voting, or the actual counting of the ballots. Now, one thing that was unique about the referendum for the Constitution was not so much the election, but the process that led up to it, which is the public discussions. For a period of 4 months, there were public meetings, 4,000 public meetings across the country, where the public was invited to offer substantive comments and suggestions for change to the draft Constitution. Those comprised 1 million suggestions that were incorporated into the final draft of the Constitution. And so this was a national process of developing a consensus on the final draft. And so this is what I call consensus democracy, where you have a participatory process for taking in input from the voters, incorporating that into the result before it's actually voted on. So unlike the propositions here in California, where they're put on the ballot by a corporation or an interest group, we have no input into it, and then we're asked to vote yes or no. So I think this is and it gave people a sense of ownership, that the final document was something that had a part of them in it. Venezuela. So Venezuela is the first country in the world to implement a fully electronic voting system with a paper trail, and it had this electronic system with the first election after Hugo Chavez was elected in 1999, and what they have here is a system that was indigenously developed for they have there's a national ID card, there's a national database of fingerprints, and this is fingerprint authentication. So this device is actually connected by a wire to the voting machine that is behind that cardboard, that security or rather secrecy barrier, and putting your fingerprint on this fingerprint reader. It looks at the database of fingerprints for this one precinct and makes a match, and then it enables the voting machine for voting. So then the voter walks over to the voting machine, gets a screen like this, which has all the different political parties, and you can see Venezuela has so many different political parties, and you know, the narrative here is that the Nicolas Maduro is a dictator and is systematically crushed the opposition, and the elections there are fraudulent, and Juan Guaido is still the so-called provisional president of Venezuela, despite the fact that he's no longer as a result of this election, no longer the president of the National Assembly, because this was a National Assembly election, and these are all the choices. These are all the political parties that were on the ballot, and most of these are opposition parties, right? So there definitely were choices, and after voting, the voter comes to sign the roster and put a fingerprint. They also put a fingerprint on that roster. and then after voting, they cast the so that machine. So this machine produces a it looks like a receipt. It's a paper tape receipt of the choices that voter has made, and then that receipt is what she's holding in her hand when she puts it into the ballot box. So there's the electronic record that is stored in the machine, and then there's this paper record that goes into that ballot box. So there's redundancy. For handicapped voters, there's assistance, and then after closing of the polls, you have the printing out of the results for the whole day, and these people in the gray jackets are international election observers. What happened during the day is that the election. This is in one of the states, Aragua State, this is called they call it the situation room. So these are the people who are monitoring in the central election office what's going on in the entire state of Aragua, and then the calling of the results at the CNE. This is the Consejo Nacional Electoral, the National Electoral Council's office, where the results are displayed. And this is the voting machine that was actually assembled and programmed in Venezuela. This is an amazing story because the warehouse where these were held was burnt. It was arson in February of last year, and between then and December, they were able to order the parts for 40,000 of these machines, assemble them, test them, and program them in time for the December election. So I'm probably running over time, but I just want to kind of summarize a few parts of this because I've begun this analysis. When we look at the fairness of elections, so one of the criteria under electoral process is voting eligibility. So how is voting eligibility determined in different voting jurisdictions? Well, in California, you can register to vote, but what additional provision? I mean, everybody can register to vote in all of these jurisdictions, but what sort of fail-safes are there? So in California, we have the same-day registration. Same-day registration is still subject to a verification, but at least it's possible to vote that same day and to have your vote counted if the validation is successful. In other words, if the validation of your identity can be done by the registrar in that county. In Georgia, they don't have same-day registration, but there is an automatic voter registration, which means that everyone who has a driver's license automatically, and they prove that they're a U.S. citizen, those people will automatically be registered to vote, and that's part of the reason for the high voter turnout in November and January. In all the Latin American countries, the voter registration is automatic because it's universal. Because every adult is given a universal voter ID card. Okay, and which makes you think that although there's resistance to having a voter ID in this country because it might disenfranchise people, some people who may lose their ID card. We're a developed country, supposedly, and if these much less developed countries can have voter ID cards and people not lose the right to vote. Why isn't that possible in the US? Anyway, it's something that should be revisited, because I think if we can implement what Latin American countries can implement and do it fairly, do it universally, then it would eliminate any kind of rationale, however however fictitious, for claims of voter fraud. Voter accessibility. So one of the big things that enables high voter turnouts in Latin American countries is the fact that elections are held on Sundays. So it's not a working day for most people. California, or rather, the United States and Canada are the only countries in the Western Hemisphere that hold elections on working days, and we do have some provisions to compensate for that, such as early voting, and all of this is recent, right? We didn't have early voting before, and now both California and Georgia have early voting. California, we've as far back as I can remember had absentee ballots. Georgia only now has them, and we now have for many years we've had mail-in ballots. And the computerized roster here, what we're talking about in Mexico, is the one that enables voting when you're not in your home precinct. Okay, so that means that if you're not home but you're in the country, you can still vote theoretically. But that's not true in other countries. It's not true in Cuba. It's not true in El Salvador. It's not true in Venezuela. The integrity of unique voter identification. So this is what I'm talking about with the voter ID card. So the Latin American countries have voter ID cards. They're in the U.S. The integrity of voter identification depends on the voter taking an oath by signing on a roster, which voters do in most other countries, and except in Mexico, where it's the oath is taken by a fingerprint. And then in addition to that, you also have the in El Salvador and Venezuela, it's both. You have both the signature and the fingerprint, not just as an oath, but as authentication in the case of Venezuela. So even if you lie under oath in the other countries, you can't do that in Venezuela. And so if you look at this, the most secure election, the one where there's the least possibility of voter fraud, is Venezuela, and perhaps the most would be in the U.S. So that's all I have for the slides, and I'll stop the sharing. And so in conclusion, I think that our elections, there's a lot that we can learn from elections in other countries, and in particular from countries in Latin America, that we keep on lecturing about democracy. Of course, we know that's not a sincere lecture about democracy. It's about using human rights and democracy as a lever against countries against governments that the U.S. government does not like, right? There's no lecture about democracy from the U.S. government. There's no lecture about democracy in Haiti. There's no lecture from the U.S. government about democracy in Honduras, right? But there's all this this lecturing to Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua. And so it's all politically motivated. But even when we look at election fairness, there's a lot to be learned from Latin America. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. It's an in-depth discussion and presentation there. So if anyone has questions, are you willing to take some questions?
Absolutely.
From the audience? Okay. You may want to unmute yourself if you have a question. You can go to gallery view so that we can see you. So while others are maybe thinking of some questions, I had a couple here. One of them was so in your experience as an international observer, have you ever observed any irregularities, or is it just your presence there is really the main reason to be there too, so that there's less tendency?
Well, the presence of observers certainly is an inhibition against irregularities, and this was certainly the case in Georgia. The fact that Brad Raffensperger knew that there would be a mobilization of thousands of election observers and election protectors meant that he had to clean up Georgia's act, and he did. So that's a factor. As far as what I actually observed, yeah, there were some. So for example, in Venezuela, there was a polling place where the governor of the province, he was going to vote there, and then after voting, he was going to do a press conference, and that's okay. The problem was that he invited two of the candidates to join him, and so the governor spoke, and then these two candidates spoke. Now they weren't campaign speeches, but they were about sure they were about praising the election system and the fact that Venezuela is holding this election in the midst of sanctions, in the aftermath of the fire that burnt all the voting machines, but still their presence as candidates and recognizable to the voters is potentially an influence, and so I would consider that to be an irregularity. Others, were told to me. I was approached by voters in Mexico who said that that they had been approached by. This was more so in 2012, that they had been approached by party workers from the PRI and from the PAN. These are the two major bourgeois parties in Mexico. The PRI of which ruled Mexico for the first 70 years of its democracy, and said that these party workers had offered them money to vote for that party. And so in 2012, it was the going rate was $300, 300 pesos, if you vote for the PRI or the PAN. And if you loan your voter ID card, we'll give you 3,000 pesos. So these are some of the irregularities. But in terms of what was going on in the polling places, no, I did not. I mean, they're minor things. Like there was one place where somebody put food on top of the ballot box, but nothing serious.
Okay, thanks. Sylvia, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. In California, the election rule the detail of that is set county by county. In Georgia, is that the same thing? Or is the whole state has the same rule? And how about the other countries?
Okay, so that's a good question. So there are election laws. Every state in the U.S. has a Secretary of State, and of course the legislature makes the laws. The Secretary of State turns that law into the regulations that govern the elections in that state. The counties implement it. Okay, so the county implementations of, for example, the county, the Secretary of State in California for 2020 said, because of COVID, we're going to have universal early voting. We're going to have universal mail-in ballots. Okay, the counties implement that. Each county separately, each of the 58 counties implements that separately. So the type of mail-in ballot is going to be different in each county. Okay, the way the early voting is done, whether what equipment is used, where the early voting centers are placed. So, for example, in Santa Clara County, the early voting centers are all over the county. There maybe, I don't know exactly, maybe 20 early voting centers, something like that, all over the county. In Alameda County, you had, to my knowledge, there was only early voting at the Registrar of Voters at the county courthouse in Oakland and at the Oakland Coliseum. So even how many early voting centers there are to be in each county, it depends on the county implementation. Yeah.
One more question. That in our election, we were taking care of the provisional ballot in case within the county, if you are not at your own precinct, you can vote provisional. In other countries, it doesn't have that concept. How did they deal with it? Of course, in Mexico, they have the center machine to verify you can go there. But in other countries, how did they all go to the precinct? Or if they couldn't, what do they do?
Right. That's so. Those countries that do not have, a national roster, the computerized national rosters, and they don't have provisional ballots. So basically, you have to be in your home precinct, or you have to register to vote where you are. I mean, so if you're, it's a problem, because if you're traveling, if you normally work where you live, but you happen to be traveling for work, let's say on election day, then you're out of luck in many cases. So that's an issue. That's an issue, and it's a count against electoral fairness in that country. So I think you alluded to something about that was happening here. Was there an aspect of your question, like in California?
I was thinking that we are actually making the election process really complex.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things that can be simplified.
Right.
And for instance, we could have a national, or even within the California, all the registrations, so that it doesn't matter where you go, you can vote. Anyway, so there is a lot to be improved in the U.S. election system, even in California.
Right. So the alternative to what we're doing is at least you know, because people travel in and out of counties all the time, it would be good to, even if we still implement elections, you know, state by state, to have a statewide system, so that you know, you can vote anywhere in the state. The universal mail-in ballot, of course, helps. It remains to be seen whether all states will make the universal mail-in ballot permanent. They probably won't. There probably will be pressure to eliminate them, particularly in those Republican-controlled states. The provisional ballot, is effectively it is the alternative to a national voter ID, because if you don't have a national voter ID and you show up at a polling place and they cannot verify, they cannot find you on the roster, then you can vote a provisional ballot in California. And if on the other hand, you could go to that polling place and present a universal voter ID card, and they had some kind of system to make sure that you have not already voted, then you wouldn't need the provisional ballot. The problem with the provisional ballot is that, think of it this way: who uses provisional ballots? So the use of provisional ballots is highest in working class neighborhoods where people rent. Okay, it's highest in university towns where you have a lot of students, and these are populations who move around a lot. They change their address, and so when they go to vote, their address doesn't match what's on the roster, or they forget, or they go to another place they're not on, you know, because they just forget to re-register, and so they get disenfranchised because they vote provisionally, and the registrar says, well, you didn't change your address, so we're going to throw out that provisional ballot. And a certain fraction, and it's going to vary from one county to another, a certain fraction of provisional ballots are thrown out with every election. Yes, Sydney.
We were talking about the Republican led, or the Republican majority now in Georgia in the Senate, and the four SB 69, SB 72, SB 71 I got, but the last one I didn't get, and they sound very worrying, and I'm wondering what kinds of things are the Georgian Democrats attempting to do before the next election to keep the opportunity for more people to vote?
Well, so the so the Georgia Democrats are going to, they're going to continue, you know, the voter registration efforts, making sure that people are aware that it matters, that their vote matters, because the margins in Georgia have been very close. And you know, in 2 years, in 4 years, the demographic transition is going to continue. You've got you know, a rapidly growing Latino population. You've got a South Asian population that's growing in Atlanta. It's changing the the voting demographics. But it's a political struggle. It's a political struggle that is going to be fought in the legislature, and you know, it all depends on the pressure that can be mounted from below by Stacey Abrams, by Common Cause, by the Southern Poverty Law Center, and so on.
Mhm.
And it's also, by the way, this is also happening in other states, and it's not the reddest states. We don't expect this to happen, for example, in Oklahoma, but we expect it to happen in Texas, right, or Florida. Why? Because these are the states that, with continuing demographic transition, will, or Arizona, will become more democratic.
Mhm.
So we are expecting. I just don't have all the information, but I know it's happening in those states.
Yeah, I was just wondering, for instance, but they are going to concentrate on notifying everybody who has the same name as somebody who has died. You know, they would have to be on it constantly every day to see the registry of deaths in the state, how many Tran Hongs there were in the state, or John Browns or whoever, and then contact all of those people who weren't the ones that died. And, you know, so it sounds like a tremendous undertaking just because of an attempt by the Republicans to disenfranchise a bunch of people. Anyway.
Right. So this is, it's not new, by the way. There are other states that have done this, and there's some documentary films on this about how some states, you know, they do a purge of the voter rolls based upon what they allege are deaths, are you know, names that they allege are showing up twice, because two people have the same names, except maybe the middle name is different. And the laws in most cases require some kind of notification, but again, it depends upon, you know, how frequently people change address. And all they're required to do is to send out a postcard. And you sometimes wonder, well, if you send out thousands of postcards, what percentage of them will get lost?
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there ought to be better ways of purging the files, because I know that in the Latino community, they have the same name. Everyone is Jorge Lopez. So it's really hard. So it's very dangerous to purge.
Right, and so one of the points that's made in some of these films is that in some of these states, where the people in the registrar's office are largely, let's say, you know, white Americans, they're not familiar with, I mean, for example, if you take the Vietnamese names, I mean, every half the names are Nguyen, right?
Yes.
And they're not familiar with these names, and they can easily say, well, these five people all have the same name. Must be one person 5 times. And so this is how these voter rolls are purged of, and of course it has an effect of of purging names that are non-Anglo-Saxon names. Well, let me ask this, since I've presented some criteria for looking at the fairness of elections, and so I'm going to ask you folks whether there's something you think there's something that I missed. Is there something that occurs to you that I ought to add to that list of aspects or criteria for fair elections?
Well, I'll just put a couple of them out there. Just the number of voting stations, places. I didn't see that on the list. This was the electoral process that we're talking about. The number, right? What happened in, was it Houston, Harris County? I think they had one voting place. People were driving miles. Maybe they remedied that before the November 3rd election, but that was really extreme suppression, I thought.
Yeah, the story there was that I guess the law in Texas requires each county to have an absentee ballot drop box. So so Harris County had one, and then the smallest county, which had less than 1,000 people in it, also had one absentee ballot drop box.
Yeah, that was a hardship for a lot of people.
Yeah.
My other, the other one I was thought was as you know, the climate is becoming more unstable, and even our political, landscape is getting more unstable. Just contingency plans for voting. Backup. It could be weather or pandemic or just whatever. Just how did you observe any countries or processes that actually had a backup plan for those kind of extreme situations?
I did not have discussion about that. The only thing that was sort of an extreme situation was actually was Venezuela under sanctions. So the situation in Venezuela under sanctions is that, as you know, Venezuela is considered to have the world's largest oil reserves. Okay, its oil production has dropped from about 2.5 million down to a few 100,000 right now because of the sanctions. But the big problem is this for Venezuela is that Venezuela has never had the capacity to refine enough diesel and gasoline for its own use. Okay, and some of the refineries have decayed because of sanctions, also because of neglect, because the priority for some reason was not there. There's some mismanagement. There is mismanagement in PDVSA, the Venezuelan state oil company. And so the gasoline and diesel production has dropped even further, and so there's a diesel and there's a petrol shortage, a gasoline shortage in Venezuela, and so what we see is that it's not so bad in Caracas, but outside of the capital, it's really bad. So you see queues that are miles long, just for petrol and diesel, and so in the midst of the election, people are sitting in these queues, and you think, well, it's going to take them more than a day to get through that queue, which means they're not going to vote. And so that was a challenge, and there was no obvious provision there to to mitigate that and enable people to vote. So the turnout in the election was low, partly because the turnout in National Assembly elections is lower than it is for presidential elections. It's also lower than it is for referenda, and it's also partly because of the petrol shortage and public frustration with what the sanctions are doing, and that no leader is really going to be able to solve that until the U.S. will lift the sanctions. And then the boycott by Juan Guaido's party, which, by the way, is not the opposition. It's not the main opposition. The main opposition was contesting the election. There was an alliance of 8 or 9 parties doing that, in addition to other parties contesting separately. But so that had a minor impact on reducing the turnout. But all of these were huge challenges for Venezuela. But Venezuela insisted that, look, the Constitution says that the elections have to be held on December 6th. And so not earlier, not later. I mean, they could have, I mean, in theory, you think, well, if they are autocratic, they could have done it earlier. And then that if they had done it earlier, Juan Guaido would have been ousted as president of the National Assembly. But no, it was held on time according to the Constitution. These elections were done according to the law, and the results have absolute integrity.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. One other note I've made was that, I mean, there must be a well-funded postal service.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Or a functioning postal service.
Right. Yeah. So I was telling people that you're going to get your mail-in ballot. So receiving your mail-in ballot depends upon a well-functioning U.S. Postal Service. But you have an alternative to sending it back, which is to drop it at an ROV ballot box.
Well, I think even that's a problem. What in Texas, weren't there some ballot boxes that were illegal, that were
No, it was
collecting ballots? And
it was California.
what was it?
Yeah, it was in Southern California.
Oh.
So the Republican Party had put up these fake ballot boxes. So they were harvesting mail-in ballots or absentee ballots.
Oh, man.
That's a problem.
California.
I'm sorry. I think Sylvia, can you unmute yourself, Sylvia?
Here, I can unmute her. See if I can. Yeah. Yes, Sylvia?
I
You were muted, so we couldn't hear you.
In the county of Santa Cruz, some friend told me that they found fake mail-in drop-in boxes. Anyway, so it's more widespread.
Yeah, I heard that there were rumors about some in Northern California as well, but I didn't know what the locations were.
But one thing I'm very happy about is to hear about the other countries. And I'm hoping that someday we will lift the sanction so that Venezuela can live. It's ridiculous about the situation. Anyway, coming back to add to Catherine's question on whether we have backup plan, is that it so happened that the flood, the snow, the ice that happened in Texas didn't happen on the election day, we will be terrible, because the storm hit many states for many days, and if that just happened to be during our election, I don't know what the result of the election is going to be. So we are very lucky.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that is good is I mean, there are some good things from there's some good fallout from the pandemic. So one of them is the early voting, the popularity of early voting, and spreading that early voting out over a period of 2, sometimes even 3 weeks. And then the universal mail-in ballot. So if those mail-in ballots go out early enough and people have enough time to respond and get them in, you know, well before the deadline, that's going to be very helpful. I do have one question. So in Santa Cruz County, do any of you know how many early voting centers there were?
I do not know.
Or not Santa Cruz, but Monterey County, sorry.
Oh, Monterey County. We went to, I think, many boxes. Let's see. In the Embassy Suite, we have one.
Well, you're talking about drop boxes.
Boxes.
Yeah.
Central voting center.
But early voting centers.
Early
Yes.
voting center. I think the Santa Cruz, not Santa Cruz, Embassy Suite is a voting center, and the in Salinas the election office, of course, is one.
It's true.
I don't know about the others, so there's 2 that I know. Probably more, but I don't know.
Okay.
At least 2.
Good.
That made it smoother. So, okay. Any more questions? Are we ready to wrap up here? This lot of good information, in-depth, first-hand information, and this is being videotaped on YouTube. So I will share that in the Peace Calendar, the link. You want to go back and review some of it. It is a lot, but it's fascinating, really interesting. Thank you so much, Dr. Lin. Really appreciate you coming and talking to it with us. If there are any other questions, you know, we can wrap up here. Thank you all for coming. And,
Thank you all for joining, and it's great to see all of you again, and it's always a pleasure to speak to you folks in Monterey County, and just thanks for your support.
Thank you.
thank you. All right,
Thank
then.
you. Thank you for being so active and going places and having the first-hand experience and bring the news back to us. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, I wanted to say, I love the title of your talk.
Oh, yeah.
I love that. I just love that. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I
Great.
thought it would be good once in a while to make a title that is not so straightforward, but just a little play on words and fairy tales.
Bye.
All right, then. Well, everyone take care. Stay healthy.
Thank
Get
you.
Healthy. Yeah. Good night.
healthy.